Welcome to the Health Design Leadership Podcast with author, speaker, and leadership coach Carol Phillips. We're here to help you sharpen your leadership skills and discover the best ways to build great teams. So sit back and enjoy this episode of the Health Design Leadership Podcast with your host, Coach Carol.
Hello, leaders. I'm Carol Phillips. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I can't wait to introduce you to my guest today. But first, let me ask you, if you sat back and asked yourself, what can I do to become a better leader? What can I do to become a better leader for myself, for my family and my personal life, and for my team and my professional life? There are so many wonderful, effective, and valuable answers to that question. But one of the most important things to remember when we're striving to be our best is to focus on building a strong foundation, looking at where all great skills originate, investing in ourselves so we can better invest in and inspire others. And that foundation is self-care, taking the time to prioritize our own health and wellness, also known as self-love. Today, I have the perfect guest to help us dive into all areas of this topic to give you so many golden nuggets that you can apply to you. We're talking about you learning to prioritize you so you can improve your health, your wellness, your mindset, your self-confidence, your coping skills, and an endless list of areas and benefits you will enjoy because you will be working on the foundation of you. And that, my friends, will automatically translate into you becoming a better leader. Now, let's talk about today's guest. Former Miss USA, Terri Britt, is a spiritual coach, intuitive leader, TEDx speaker, award-winning author, and founder of the Women Leaders of Love global community. For nearly 25 years, Terri has inspired people to claim their crowns and own their worth so they feel nurtured, loved, and supported in every area of life. Terri is amazing, and I would encourage you to check out Terri's TEDx talk, her Miss USA interview with Bob Barker, and all her great Women Leaders of Love videos on her YouTube channel. You can also find Terri's books on her website and on Amazon. As we enjoy our conversation with Terri today, I encourage you to find one or two new leadership skills you can use to help your team thrive beginning today. Now, let's chat with Terri. Welcome to the show, Terri.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I love what you're all about, Carol. And you and I have known each other for a long time. And I love what you're bringing to people and helping them really thrive. So thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. And thanks for spending time with us today. Terri, I can't believe it's already been a decade since we first met, and it's been such a pleasure to see the positivity and the light that you bring to the world. It's glowing, and I love it. To get started, can you share with us your journey from being a truly radiant, smart, and fun Miss USA to embracing your passion for helping people be the leaders of love in their own lives?
Oh my gosh, Carol, because oh, that's interesting the way you phrase that. Because okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. As Miss USA, on the outside, I looked fun and alive and passionate. And I talked about when Bob Barker asked me in the top 12 interview competition, he says, "What do you do in Cabot, Arkansas? Population 4,000 on a Saturday night." And I said, "Well, Bob, in the winter we stay at home, but in the summer we go downtown to the Tasty Freeze. My friend, we sit on the back of his truck. He plays the banjo, and the guys drink a little beer and dip a little skull. It's a real good time." And I won, which was amazing because I had just left college. I'd lived my whole life on a hamster wheel, trying to be the best, always going after every achievement. And I was miserable. And so I left school by listening to my intuition. I was home second semester of my sophomore year from college, and I had followed my boyfriend to a college that didn't have a broadcasting department, and yet I wanted to be in broadcasting. How dysfunctional was I? And So I was talking to a friend and I said, I hate school. And he said, so don't go. And I said, I have to. And he said, says who? And literally this energy flooded over me. It was a knowingness. I kind of describe it as, when you're a kid and you put your hand over your head and you crack your fist on your head like an egg. And you're like, ooh, feel the egg cracking on you. That's what it felt like. Okay. That was exactly what it felt like. And I knew in that moment that I had to leave school. And so I moved home within the week. I had a job. I got a job immediately. I mean, everything was flowing. And lo and behold, I enter Miss Arkansas, win, and 2 weeks later, I'm sent to Miss USA. Not 2 months, but 2 weeks later. So I went in there with short brown hair, just like, okay, here I am. Now, what most people don't know is had always wanted to go to Los Angeles, and growing up in Arkansas, and I did not know how to get to LA. So I actually entered the pageant hoping that I could somehow get to LA or get seen, right? It wasn't about winning the pageant for me. It was about let me just be seen. So during the rehearsals, I don't know if I've ever shared this on air. So during the rehearsals, I was on the front row because I'm a decent dancer. And so I'm thinking, this is my opportunity to be seen, right? This is my opportunity. Well, Miss Texas, who is the largest state pageant in the nation, she won almost as much prizes and cash as I did as Miss USA. It's crazy. She comes walking in. She had not been in the rehearsals at all, her and a few other pageants, because they had a lot of media covering them and they were being, always pulled to do interviews. She walks in. They take me and my front row spot, put me on the back row, and give her my spot.
Oh,
Talk about competition, right? I had a lot of anger issues back then, okay? And I went nuts, screaming and crying. This thing is rigged. I don't want to be a part of this.
oh, geez.
Yeah, because I really did. I felt it was rigged, and I was a very, very uptight person. So thankfully the head chaperone pulled me into the bathroom and said, listen, this is what's going on. These states have a lot of media coverage, yours doesn't, and this is why they're getting pulled out. But it still didn't explain why, I get to be put on the back row, other than Miss Texas wanted Miss Texas to be seen on the front row dancing so the viewers could see her.
Right.
So it was all, that kind of stuff. But so when you describe me as this, happy, perky, passionate person, there was that side of me. But behind that was this part of me that felt very inadequate, felt very unworthy. I was very dysfunctional. That night after winning Miss USA, I almost gave the crown back because my boyfriend and I had been talking about getting married, and I knew that I was being sent to New York. He was going to be left behind in Arkansas. So I was very much in my dysfunction about this is what love is. This is the way you're supposed to live your life. You're supposed to not shine. You're supposed to suppress yourself. You shouldn't claim your crown. To the point where I discussed that night with my family and my boyfriend of giving the crown back. Like, can you imagine it?
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? It's so crazy. So thankfully I didn't.
Right.
And there were some, wonderful opportunities and stuff that happened as Miss USA. But I think the biggest seed that was planted was when I left school, by listening to my intuition. And then I entered the Miss Arkansas pageant by listening to my intuition, listening to my heart. And I stood in my truth, talking about drinking beer and dipping skull in the pickup truck. Then a miracle showed up. I won, right? So that seed was planted, but it did not fully take hold because I got back like I was in school, back on the hamster wheel, working in the television industry. What's now the E channel used to be Movie Time. I was the news anchor. So it was always a competition, it was that sense of I got to prove my worth in everything that I do. Well, yeah. And I mean, I think most of our listeners can relate to that, especially leaders, right? When we're talking about being a leader in a home, leader in business, whatever, it's always the sense I've got to go hard. I've got to prove my worth.
Yes.
And because with the intention of I will receive love and life's rewards in return when I've done a good job of proving my worth. So I continue that. And when I really noticed it is when I became a mother. So I married my late husband. We were married for 17 years. I'm now married to my husband, Charlie, for 15 years after my first husband, Steve, died. But we got together and I realized that he had a son, a young son from a previous marriage. I realized I was not very good at being a mom. I felt like I was trying to control him, trying to make him be the best, trying to prepare him for the future. I thought that was the right thing to do. And instead, I found myself angry and controlling. Well, then I had my two little girls, and I realized, I'm perpetuating some pain here. Well, as a kid, I had always deified my dad. It was like dad was God. He had the last say about everything. Dad's way was the right way. Well, in the last few years of his life, he had filed bankruptcy, lost everything in business. He had been a self-made man, lost everything, became an alcoholic, couldn't deal with any of it, and he died. He died at the age of 54 from lung cancer. And I remember looking at him going, gosh, Dad, I love you so much. And he looked shocked when I said that to him because he didn't have any self-worth. Because he had felt like a failure, he didn't know how to receive our love. He had no forgiveness of himself. So if you have no forgiveness of yourself, you don't know how to receive very, very well. And in that moment, I realized I'm like my dad. I've got to stop this cycle. I don't want to perpetuate this for my family. And it was so cool because as soon as I made that decision, I was in therapy to kind of debrief myself on my dad's death. And my therapist said, "You're wound really tight. You need to get into meditation." And she was right. I was wound really tight. And the next thing I know, I ended up at an energy school this was back in the 90s in Southern California. Started studying meditation for the first time in my life, felt peaceful and joyful. And then I started learning about energy and healing and then ended up in a almost 2-year program, I guess it was 2 years altogether of learning to read energy and to clear out my own stuff so that I could be a better intuitive healer. Well, as I started clearing out my stuff, the stuff that caused me to be in emotional chaos, I realized that I was becoming a better wife, a better mom. I was more playful, more joyful. And in that realization, I realized that I had been performing my whole life to prove my worth. And so I made a commitment that no longer was I going to do that. I was going to commit to loving myself. And what happened, it was so cool because in my home, I became what I call a woman leader of love. And even my late husband said it to me. He said, "You're the grounding cord for this family," because I made it my mission to constantly love myself. If I was reacting to my children, if I was reacting to my husband, if I was reacting to the outer world, I made it my mission to say thank you for the gift. And instead of blaming, what was going on around me for my unhappiness or my feelings of inadequacy, I would go within and look at the little girl inside of me and talk to her and say, what's hurting? What's causing you to suffer? And by doing that and then giving her permission to stand in her truth, I became more loving. I became more passionate, more playful. So what you saw on the outside as Miss USA was actually happening on the inside, which was huge.
That is so powerful. And isn't it true we watch the pageants and we think, oh, their lives are perfect and they're so happy and everything's wonderful. And that's not the case at all, because that's not realistic. And when we do learn to look inside and see what's going on between our own ears on a regular basis, and that the self-talk, it's just amazing what we see where we're not always so kind to ourselves. And part of it is society, because when we're really loving ourselves and being positive and putting ourselves first, sometimes it's viewed as being selfish. And we need to stop doing that, because we all need to be empowering ourselves and loving ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Well, this is the conclusion I came to, is over time, as I continued to practice this, I saw my late husband, who was a very, very successful garment manufacturer. I mean, he was at one point in Los Angeles, was listed in the Los Angeles Business Journal as one of the top 100 fastest growing companies in LA. So he was very, very, very successful. We had the 50-foot yacht, we had the 7,000 square foot home, We had, the ideal little family, classic cars. Could do anything we wanted to. Lived in Manhattan Beach, which was a beautiful, little area in Southern California. I mean, we had everything, but he was miserable. He was absolutely miserable because it was always about needing to prove his worth, needing to prove his worth. I was needing to prove my worth as a wife and mom. As I shifted, what I saw is him shift. And he would say to me, "You're the grounding cord for our family." But I remember him telling me, he said, "I feel better in my skin than I've ever felt." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You forced me to it." And I said, "How did I do that?" And he said, "When you quit caretaking me to find yourself, it forced me to find myself. And I feel better in my skin than I've ever felt." I
Wow.
thought about that.
And how awesome is that he shared that with you? And you use that great phrase, own your worth. And when
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with business leaders, I ask them to prioritize their own self-care and confidence to be better role models for their teams.
Mm-hmm.
Terri, can you please talk to us about this important concept that everyone can benefit from?
Yes, owning your worth. So, what I have seen over the years, and because I work with energy as well, and I don't know how many of your listeners are into energy and quantum physics, but when we're trying to prove our worth, what we're actually doing is sending a message that who I am is not enough. Now, think about that.
Mm,
If you are trying to be the, make the most money because that's going to prove your worth. If you are trying to be the best parent because you feel like that's going to prove your worth, what you're in essence saying is just being me is not enough. And what that does energetically is sends out a message of guilt and shame. And when we look at the map of consciousness, guilt and shame are the two lowest energies there are. Shame is the lowest out of 1,000 at 20, guilt is at 30. So when you are coming from this space of performing, trying to be good, holding back your voice, not being who you are, suppressing your light, all of those things, because that in essence is trying to be good or trying to be the best as well. I'm going to be the best girl. I'm going to be the best guy, right? I mean, it's like you are living by these rules. When you live by those, you come from these lower vibrations. And because energy always attracts like energy, life is going to continue to throw lemons at you, and you're going to feel like you're on a hamster wheel of stress and struggle. And so, what I discovered is that as I said no more to performing and said yes to loving myself, I crossed this divide of lack and took a stand for loving myself. And what I did is what I was shown through meditation. One day, just little Terri showed up, and I'd never seen her before. Um, I was like, she just showed up and I was crying and crying. And I actually heard Get Up and Write This. This is the beginning of your book, which was my first book, Message Sent. But as I would talk to her, all of a sudden, I started feeling as if I were really seen, as if I were really heard, as if I were really valued. As I treated myself by making this connection as if I mattered, I felt so much more love on the inside, so much more worthiness. And because I was now feeling worthy, I started opening up to receive miracles. And I could tell we could be here all day, me sharing miracles with you of things that have shown up. And like when I first started doing this, I was on my first book tour for Message Sent, and it was during the beginning of the Iraq War where everything was getting canceled. All my news interviews were being canceled to cover the news. I mean, to cover the war. And so I sat there and said, okay, part of me was the ego said, I got to get back on the hamster wheel. I got to get back on the hamster wheel. And my soul said, no, I just want to be a vegetable for a couple of days. And I had a manager back then. She's saying, you need to go see Thoroughly Modern Millie. It's a great metaphor for your work. Or she said that or hairspray. And I just threw it up in the air and I said, you know what? I'm going to be a vegetable. This is what my heart is telling me. Tomorrow I'm going to get up and go to the New York Health and Racket Club, and then we'll figure it out from there. So I did that, and I did it. And here's the key: without guilt or shame, because oftentimes when we're doing self-care, when we think we're owning our worth, we'll be in our head going, well, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And that takes us back down to that guilt or shame level. Okay.
Yes,
So it's sabotaging us. But when
right.
we can really be in acceptance of this is where I am right in this moment, we're owning our worth. And so what happened for me that day is I did all that. I just stayed with myself and, cuddled up and made myself really nurtured. The next day, I went to the New York Health and Racquet Club, meet a woman before a Pilates class I was going to take, come back out afterwards, start talking to her, and she just happens to say, "So, are you going to see any plays while you're in New York?" And I said, "I don't know. My manager wants me to see Hairspray or Thoroughly Modern Millie." And she goes, "Oh, well, I work in management at the Marriott Marquis, and Thoroughly Modern Millie is playing in our theater. How about I take you as my guest?"
Wow.
Okay. So that moment, Carol, blew my mind.
That's
It blew my
unbelievable.
mind because, you think about just all of New York, the one day, the one class, the one gym, the one woman, I mean, it was miraculous. And so what I took from that moment was that it kind of started cementing what I had been feeling as Miss USA when that seed was planted. It started really cementing that wow, when I love and nurture myself, when I own my worth without shame or guilt, when I stop the performance, I open up to miracles and abundance. And I call this your worthiness quotient. So your worthiness quotient is how open are you to receiving the love, nurturing, and support that you deserve. And if it's low, it means you're still performing. And when you talked about earlier about selfishness, what came to my realization was, and this is not a religious thing, but I was raised religiously that putting God first was putting yourself last.
Mm,
And think about that. I mean, think
mm.
about in our culture how that is so prevalent. Well, I'm serving, I'm putting myself last. I shouldn't, it shouldn't, I shouldn't matter. No, no. That's why we have so much war. That's why we have so much competition. We have to honor and love the way we were created. And so for
Mhm.
me, crossing that divide of lack into a high state of worthiness became a purpose, my sole purpose of putting God first. When I honor and love the way I was created, I am putting God first and I become a messenger of love. Now
Yeah.
that is what changed my family. It has my husband now. We have a big coffee roasting company. We ship to all over the country. We have a tasting room of wine and coffee house on 7.5 acres in North Georgia. Very, very, very thriving business. And he had to get to that place because he was the workaholic. He still has a tendency because he actually loves to work. He thrives on the creativity. But what he's had to do as a leader in the business is to learn how to say, okay, what is my truth and what isn't, right? So as he's loved himself more and gotten to know himself, he's then asked himself, so what is my truth? And I remember I gave him a meditation to listen to several years ago before we had this the tasting room on the 7.5 acres. We just had a little shop plus the roasting business, and it was on prosperity consciousness versus poverty consciousness. And so he listens to this audio, and as he comes out of it, he says, "I'm in poverty consciousness." And I said, "Why? What do you mean by that?" And poverty consciousness is when you're doing what you think you should be doing and keeping yourself at a low worthiness quotient.
Hmm.
He said, "Well, I want wholesale business, but I don't want to be on the road anymore. I want to be at home with you." And at that time, our dogs were alive. And he goes, "I want to be at home with you and the dogs." So he stopped. He stopped going after wholesale business, just cold turkey, without guilt, without shame, without judgment. And let me tell you, wholesale business started flooding in. It
Wow.
was crazy, Carol. It was so nutty. And then just a few months later, the property that is literally like, I don't even know if it's 2 miles from our house. Maybe once we get down our mountain, but it's very close. Um, it came up for sale and we ended up getting it. So he is really being in this state of owning his worth and really leading with love in his life. But what's so cool about it, going back to your thought earlier about selfishness, is if I had not been leading with love in our relationship and encouraging him to do the same, he wouldn't be thriving like he is. With my late husband, he ended up leaving the garment industry and took a year and a half off. And I remember going into the library one day and felt called to pull out a VHS tape of Deepak Chopra's Way of the Wizard, and it's about different levels of consciousness. I didn't follow Deepak. I brought it home, though, because my intuition said bring it home.
Mm-hmm.
So I stuck it in the VHS player. This, again, was back in the 90s. And I watched it, and I said, oh, this isn't for me. I only watched like 2 minutes of it. I said, Steve, this is for you. He comes in, sits down, starts watching it, and begins to cry.
Wow.
He says, I don't want to be an achiever anymore. I want to be a seeker. I want to let everything go. And he did. He let everything go. He took about 1.5 years off. And then he said to me one day, I want to do something bigger than myself, because it had always been about proving his worth. He said, I want to do something bigger than myself. I want to do something for the planet and God. Well, next thing I know, I don't know if you know, do you know who Donald Walsh is, who wrote Conversations with God?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah. Well, his daughter shows up. I don't know how she found Steve and her partner. And they said, we have an idea for a company, and you're the man to create it. That was Conscious One, which is the forerunner to all the platforms we see now. Hay House, all the spiritual platforms, Mind Valley, all of those that have courses and authors, classes, and stuff like that. We had one of the first ones. And what was so interesting about, I guess it's been about 6 or 7 years ago, I took a course called Enlightened Bestseller with Janet Atwood, Chris Atwood, and Marcy Shimoff. And they're showing you how to write a book proposal and all this stuff, and then affiliate marketing. And as I'm shuffling through the pages, I come across at the top of the page, it says consciousone.com. And it hit me in that moment that I remember just thinking, I did that. Even though Steve had created the company with his partners that he brought in and with the people who came to him, I was the one who planted the seed to be a leader of love, to own his worth, to get off the hamster wheel, to stand in his truth, and to lead with love. So when we talk about it being selfish, it is so far from selfish when you take a stand for loving yourself and you find your gifts, you find your passions, you thrive and become that example, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the home, whether it's with your friends, it doesn't matter. You become that example for others to follow as well.
Yes, and then we're setting that example, and then we're passing off that positive energy. You remind people to stand in their truth. Can you explain to our listeners what this means to you and how they can use this to benefit their own lives?
Absolutely. So, like, for instance, going back to Miss USA, when I talked about drinking beer and dipping skull in the back of a pickup truck, I was completely authentic. I stood in my truth and just said it without shame, without guilt, and boom, I won. My interviews are what carried me all the way to the top of Miss USA. Going into the top 12, I was not even in the top 12 until the interview competition. So standing in your truth is really not only speaking it, but knowing deep in your heart, what is right for me? What puts me in alignment with love, with unconditional self-love? And so, for instance, if you're in a workplace and you are a leader, but you're feeling like, well, I have to hold my voice back a little bit because I don't want to lose the people that work for me, because I see this a lot, right? It's like if you speak up and you say what you need to say, then people might get offended.
Right.
But you have to think of it as your outer world is a mirror to your inner world, right? And I see this in our small business, because this is something that I think I've seen Charlie deal with a little bit, because he's such a nice guy. He is like the nicest man on the planet, and he doesn't want anybody to hurt. He's got a heart as big as the universe. And so sometimes he will find himself going around in circles to say what he needs to say, because he's built this team that supports him so much, and it's given him freedom now to do what he wants to do. And so for a while, he'd have a hard time taking a stand for, okay, we need to do it this way or we need to do it that way, because he didn't want to lose that. It was like that was a low worthiness, right? It was like feeling like, well, if I speak my truth, I'm not going to have the right people. They're going to leave, and then I'm going to have to take over and do this work again that I don't want to do anymore. So there was that fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've seen with him is that as he has really taken a stand with his voice and trusted that, okay, whatever's going to show, whatever happens is for the highest good, that there's someone better that's going to come along if the person leaves. But just in that permission level to speak your truth. So what I see a lot of times is someone doesn't speak their truth, and then someone who's trying to speak their truth gets a little, like agitated and aggressive, which is what I used to do a lot because I didn't have permission to speak my truth. And I wanted to say I did, but inside there was this battle going on about, oh, I can't speak my truth. I can't say what I feel. And then the other part was like, but you need to. And so the battle would come out as abrasive to the people around me. And so what I started to learn is that if I will really give myself permission to speak my truth, coming from a space of pure acceptance that this is who I am, this is my feelings, these are my thoughts, these are my dreams, these are my ideas, this is my wisdom, then as I owned it and embraced it and stood in that truth more and more and more, then the words started coming out softer. They started coming out in a way that people could hear them. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. And it takes maturity, experience. And what I've found is over the years, I've learned when to bite my tongue and not say something that is going through my brain versus if something keeps tapping me on the shoulder, to learn how to find the words and say it and not live in fear. Because it's true, because it becomes so freeing. And then you also stop worrying about how negative people will respond when you're trying to stand in your truth.
Absolutely. I will tell you this, as an intuitive healer who was raised fairly religiously, it was very hard for me to say for a very long time that I'm an intuitive healer. I mean, I've had people say to me, you're working with the devil, you're doing this, you're doing that. And yet my whole mission is to bring love on the planet. But it would trigger me. I remember the first time it was said to me, my whole body started convulsing.
Wow.
So it was a very, very scary thing for me to speak my truth. And so it's been a chipping away over the years of saying, you know what, this is the way I was created, and I'm going to honor and love this. But again, I think for me, where it's been the hardest is with my family, because you love them so much, right? And I'm very different than my family. I am very, very different. I mean, to me, if I get a cut on my finger, I'm going to be looking up the spiritual symbolism of that because I know it's my soul speaking to me. And I thrive on it. It's like, oh, cool. What's my soul telling me today? If a bird shows up on my window, I'm like, okay, bird, what are you telling me today? Because I know that everything is a part of this all-loving presence of God. And so I feel so connected to it. But my family members are not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they might look at it down the line, and sometimes they might be open, sometimes they not, but they have their own path, right? And I have to be okay with that.
Yes.
So that was a harder thing for me. My family is, my main company is called Enlightened Family Institute. So when Charlie and I got married, we had a ceremony based on being an enlightened family. So we made that commitment, but that doesn't mean that everybody wants to hear what I have to say. And so when I feel so I'm going to be me, because I'm not saying anything that's hurtful or whatever, but if I feel them resisting it, there's a tendency to go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And it's like, wait, no. This is who I am. And I said nothing intentional to hurt them. It was not hurtful. It was just information. And if they don't want to receive it, that's up to them. And so in the same way, on the other side, if somebody does something and I am triggered, instead of being in blame with them, and this is a big part of standing in your truth and figuring out what your truth is if somebody says something and I get triggered, or somebody does something, or there's something happening in the world that triggers me, I look at it as an opportunity to find out what my truth is. So, for instance, in the workplace, if somebody is getting all the raises, I was coaching this one woman for a long time, and she kept seeing these other people around her get the raises and get the better job, and she wasn't getting it. And so it was a big core issue for her to go within and look at why and what were the beliefs she was holding on to that said she wasn't worthy of being seen like that. And there was a whole bunch of stuff around it because it was a core issue for her. So it's about looking, it's like, what is my truth? When I'm reacting to something, going within, I look at my little inner child and I pick her up and I'm like, I'm so sorry you're hurting. I'm so sorry you're triggered. I love you so much. What's hurting inside of you? And I let the feelings come up. I talk to her. I get down to the bottom of it. And it usually goes something back, like a current situation will take me back to childhood, to similar memories. And then I'll ask her, what was the belief you took on in that moment? And when I realize the belief, what it is, usually if a belief is causing you pain and suffering, it's not the truth.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's really important, right? If it's
Right.
causing me pain and suffering, it's not the truth. So when I release that, and then I ask that little girl inside of me, what is your truth? And I get the answer. And I might get it by a picture in my mind. I might hear it. I might feel it. I might even, just have this deep knowingness. When I know my truth is standing in that truth. So, for instance, if you are not getting in the job position that you want, and you keep getting looked over, and you go to do this inner work, and you realize, wait, you know what? As a kid, my sister got all the attention, and I took on a belief that I wasn't worthy of it, and so what do I do now with this? And so you might ask the little girl, what do you need from me to feel loved, that inner child? And she says, well, I want you to go speak up and say that you'd like to be, considered. Because a lot of times people say, well, why am I not getting considered for this? But they're not even speaking up that they want it.
Right.
Or they're working really, really hard, but they won't put themselves out there. So it's like, okay, well, then the next step is to go and talk to your boss and really share from your heart what is in your heart. That is taking a step and sending a message to the universe that says, I am worthy of this abundance. So
Right.
that is standing in your truth.
And we need to be having those conversations with ourselves in a loving way every
Mm-hmm.
single day, because it really puts us in a much better place. Let's talk about leading with love. There are certain things that should be on our radar all day, every day. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that this is one of them. Can you share with us how we can use this great tool, and also how can people embrace this idea during times when life may not seem lovely at all?
Oh, I get that. Oh, yeah. So leading with love is when you really, you've been owning your worth, you're taking a stand, you're loving yourself unconditionally, and then you're standing in your truth. You're paying attention to your outer world, you're going within, you're giving yourself permission to be who you are, because a lot of times we don't know who we are. And then leading with love means that you walk in that truth. You lead with love. So when you say, I'm going to commit to loving myself unconditionally by owning my worth, and I'm going to stand in my truth, you're now in this different vibration. You're a light. Even though you may feel dark, you're more light than you were. And then you listen to your instincts about, okay, so where do I go here? Where do I go there? It's really about listening to your intuition and leading with love, because your intuition is God speaking to you. And so, or source speaking to you, your soul speaking to you, whatever you want to call it. And so when you are leading with love, you are in divine connection and you're coming from that space. So now it becomes a sense of purpose. It becomes a sense of, when I take a step, every step that I take, and I am living in this light, standing in my truth, every person is going to get to watch me speak my voice, set boundaries, shine my light, receive abundance. Because every time you stand in your truth and you own your worth, you're going to receive more abundance. You're going to have more goodness come to you, and it's going to support you and nurture you, because you're nurturing and supporting yourself. And so as you walk forward in this, you're leading with love. And another thing that I've seen with leading with love is that as I have done this for myself, I see other people, instead of combating them, where I used to be always in a battle, always in competition, like in Miss USA. Um, Instead, I feel like I'm in a space as the observer, and I can watch people and see where their pain is. I mean, we know that. You're like, oh,
Mhm.
so and so, and you get a bunch of women together, like, oh, so and so, they're really struggling with this. We know that, right? But
Yes.
instead of matching their energy, we rise above it. And because what happens a lot of times is, when we go into our woundedness and we go into a low worthiness quotient, we get down here and somebody's down in this dark stuff, and we come down and match them, and now we're bumping heads. But if
Hmm.
you stay above it and in the light, and knowing that I'm going to stand in my truth. I've claimed my crown, own my worth, and I'm leading with love. Instead of dropping to their energy level, you invite them to rise up to yours.
Yes. Yes, that's so powerful. And when I work with business leaders, I encourage them to create a culture where people aren't gossiping and looking at people's weaknesses and not being there for them. Instead, create a culture where people are loving themselves and then looking outward toward people who might need help so that they can be there for them and they can coach them and they can help them rise out of whatever they're struggling with. So yes, definitely it's easy to just go down to where they're at instead of helping to rise them up. We're in those situations on a regular basis. We just need to put them on our radar and recognize them.
So, and I absolutely agree with you on that. And so the awareness is key, right? What you just said is awareness. And so for me, and what I, try to share with people in my coaching business is that when you find yourself lowering yourself to their vibration and to what's their whatever the negativity is or whatever, then there's a part of you that is hurting. There's a part of you, maybe it wants to belong, maybe it feels like it can't be unique, it has to conform. And so those are opportunities where if you will say, thank you for the gift. This isn't feeling safe for me. This isn't feeling loving. I've got to get my energy back up. So what is it? What is the false belief that I bought into? So you go right back to that process again of letting your feelings guide you to the original belief that is causing your pain and suffering. So for me, I mean, used to, it was like every single day I was like, okay, what is the gift here? I'm really needing to do some healing. But over time now, it's few and far between because I feel like I'm in a state where I'm pretty darn good. I'm pretty, I'm pretty solid in my worthiness. I mean, I have moments, but overall I'm pretty solid in my worthiness. But I've also been doing this for 25 years. So, and I'm 62. So, that makes a difference. If you're a younger person or you haven't done any spiritual work, it may feel like, gosh, I'm just constantly asking for what the gift is. I'm having to work really hard to keep myself in a state of leadership. And that is okay, because that is your path to really aligning with the way you were created. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be done right all the time. It's just about making the commitment that this is my deepest purpose, is to lead with love by owning my worth and standing in my truth.
That's terrific. I love that. And oh, thank you. That gives our listeners so much to think about. And it's just amazing how when you make that shift and you start taking the time, listening to what's going on in your own head, and then inviting the goodness in, everything changes after that. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. All right, Terri, it's time for Coach Carol's quick quiz. Are you ready?
Okay. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm a little nervous about this.
You're going to be awesome. Be afraid. Be very afraid. No, I'm just joking. It's going to be fun. All right. I'm going to throw some questions at you just for fun. And so our listeners can learn a little more about you. There's 5 questions. Give me the first thing that comes to mind. Number 1, Terri, what's your superpower and why do you believe it's your superpower?
My intuition is my superpower because as I have connected to it, cleaning out all the old crap that was in my mind about how I should be and really release the emotional chaos, my intuition, oh my gosh, it guides me into balance and peace and joy. And it takes me on a fabulous adventure.
And you know what? We all have it, right? We just need to tap into it and see how powerful it is. I like to refer to it as peeling back the ugly onions, that onion peels that cover it up, all negative things that have happened in our lives that we internalized and we haven't gotten rid of. And once we get rid of those and recognize the cobwebs, then it's just amazing what our intuition can help us with. Absolutely. All right, number 2, what's your favorite thing to do on a lazy day?
Oh, I love to go out in nature. I live in the mountains of Georgia at the Blue Ridge Mountains, the beginning of the Appalachian Trail. I don't hike the Appalachian Trail, but I love going out into the woods and just absorbing and taking it in. And I talk to the trees and the birds. Oh, I feel so connected when I'm there.
Isn't nature amazing?
Oh, I love
It
it.
really is. It's amazing. That's terrific. Number 3, what's the most unconventional food you've ever eaten, and did you like it?
Well, I'm going to tell you the most unconventional food that was ever put on my plate. It was in Hong Kong as Miss USA, and they put this thing on my plate that looked like a big bug. Actually, it looked like a big tick with a lot of legs, and I looked at it and I said, "No, thank you." But other than that was cow's tongue.
Ooh,
Yeah, and I did not like it. I could
didn't
feel
like
the taste buds on the tongue, but yeah, but the worst that I did not even attempt to try was in Hong Kong.
Oh my God. Wow. So I have to ask, what did the taste buds taste like?
They were bumpy, just like our own taste buds, but the idea that I was chewing on it and I could feel these little buds on the tongue. Just the idea of it right now is just grossing me out. I was like, no.
I'm sorry, I'm traumatizing you. All right, this one's better, Terry. Number 4, M&Ms or Skittles?
M&Ms for sure. I'm a chocolate nut.
What kind of M&Ms?
All of them. I
Oh,
love all of them. I love peanut. I love regular. I love the new coffee ones. I love the caramel ones. I mean, I'm a chocolate lover and I love all those flavors. So yes, that could be my weakness if I let them stay in my house all the time.
and I remember when there was only plain M&Ms, and when peanut M&Ms came out, oh my God,
Mhm.
I was like, these are awesome.
Is that your favorite too?
Yes, peanut M&Ms.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yum.
But I have to say, it's weird. About once a year, I get this craving for Skittles.
Oh, see, I can't do the sweet sour stuff. I just can't. Like my kids have always loved all that stuff. It's like, ugh, I'm just thinking about it. My mouth starts watering in a bad way.
In a bad way.
Yeah.
All right, number 5. What's the most important lesson you've learned in life so far?
To love myself unconditionally and stop performing because that's when I treat myself as if I matter, I'm worthy of being seen, heard, and valued. And then I align with God and miracles show up.
Mm. And I love how you talk about stop performing, because
Mhm.
don't we spend a lot of time
Oh,
performing instead of just being our authentic selves?
completely. It is,
Yeah.
we are so ingrained in our culture, whether it starts in the home, in the school, in the workplace, we are ingrained to perform instead of nurturing the gifts. And this is one thing I have to say about my late husband, and my husband now too, but when I first started noticing it, is he had a garment company, as I told you, and he would hire somebody for a particular position because that was what the position was open. But as he started noticing their gifts, he would move them into that place because he knew that's where they would thrive.
Mm.
Hmm.
Wow, that's powerful.
Hmm.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for being a good sport with our questions.
Oh, yeah.
Terry,
Yeah.
before
I
we
thought you
wrap
were going to ask me something about sex, and I was really going to get into it, but oh well.
next time when you come back, that would be a whole different podcast. Terry, what's the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and reach out to you?
My website is the great place to go, terribritt.com, terriibritt.com. I'd also say go take the worthiness quotient quiz, see if you've really owned your worth. Are you performing? How open are you to receiving? And it's free. You get a personalized report and all kinds of information that comes with it, tips and tools to help you begin to raise your worthiness quotient. And that's at terribritt.com/quiz.
Ooh, terrific. That's great. I will definitely check that out. Terry,
Awesome.
thank you so much for being with us today and for being the amazing, loving person you are. You, my friend, are owning your worth, standing in your truth, and leading with love.
Oh, thank you, Carol. You are too. I appreciate you so much.
Ditto. Listeners, you can learn more about Terri at terribritt.com. That's TERRIBRITT.com. And take advantage of her free gift, the Worthiness Quotient Breakthrough Bundle. at terribritt.com/leaders. Thank you to all the business leaders listening today who are making their companies the best places to work. Be on the lookout for our next podcast and make today a great day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Health Design Leadership Podcast with Carol Phillips. Be sure to click on the subscribe button so you won't miss any new episodes. Join our online leadership dream team at askcoachcarol.com. If you're looking for an engaging speaker for your next event or an effective trainer to strengthen your leadership team, contact Coach Carol today. Thanks again for listening, and make it a great day.